I'm Morgan, 38 years old and owner of a successful marketing agency. 10 years ago, my sister Heather betrayed me in the worst way possible. She stole my fiancé Ethan right before our wedding. We hadn't spoken since, until our mother's funeral last month forced us into the same room. When Heather mocked my supposedly single status, I felt a bittersweet triumph introducing my husband. The look on her face when she realized who he was? Absolutely priceless. Before I dive into this wild story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments and subscribe if you want more stories about family drama and unexpected revenge. Growing up, Heather and I were never the picture of sisterly harmony that our parents hoped for. Being only 2 years apart, me the older one, created a natural rivalry that our parents unintentionally intensified. Our mother Eleanor would often buy us matching outfits, sign us up for the same activities, and compare our achievements at family gatherings. Our father Richard tried to treat us as individuals, but the damage was already done. Heather developed this unsettling habit of wanting whatever I had. When I was 7, I received a beautiful porcelain doll for my birthday. Within a week, Heather had accidentally broken it. At 12, I made the middle school volleyball team. Suddenly, Heather became obsessed with volleyball too. When I was 16 and started dating my first boyfriend Jason, Heather, at 14, somehow managed to get him to kiss her at a family barbecue. The pattern was established early and continued relentlessly. Despite these challenges, I tried to maintain a relationship with my sister. I believed that as we matured, the competitive dynamic would fade. I was wrong. I met Ethan during my junior year of college. He was tall, charming, and studying business with plans to join his father's investment firm after graduation. We connected instantly over a shared love of classic films and hiking. Our first date lasted 6 hours, dinner extended into coffee, then a spontaneous walk through campus, ending with conversation on the steps of my apartment building until 2 a.m. Our relationship progressed quickly. Within 6 months, we were practically living together. Ethan came from money, the kind of wealth where vacation homes and private education were simply expected. But he wasn't flashy about it, which I respected. He talked about wanting to make his own mark in the world, not just live off his family name. I found that admirable. After 3 years together, during a weekend trip to his family's lake house, Ethan proposed with his grandmother's vintage diamond ring. I was ecstatic. We planned a wedding for the following spring, giving us about 10 months to prepare. That's when things started to shift. I introduced Ethan to my family early in our relationship, but it was during our engagement that Heather began inserting herself into our lives more intensely. She volunteered to help with wedding planning, offering to accompany me to vendor meetings and dress fittings. At first, I was touched by her apparent enthusiasm and support. I thought perhaps this shared joy might heal our fractured relationship. Looking back, the warning signs were all there. Heather would casually touch Ethan's arm during conversations. She'd reference inside jokes I wasn't part of. She started dressing differently when she knew he would be around, more makeup, more revealing clothes. Still, I trusted Ethan completely and dismissed my unease as old insecurities bubbling up. Then came the day that shattered everything. I'd been working on final wedding details and decided to surprise Ethan by bringing lunch to his apartment. I had a key, so I let myself in quietly, thinking I might catch him napping. He'd been working late hours at his internship. Instead, I caught him in bed with Heather. The scene is burned into my memory. Discarded clothes on the floor, my sister's familiar perfume hanging in the air, and the look of shock on both their faces when I opened the bedroom door. For a moment, we all froze in a tableau of betrayal. Morgan. Ethan scrambled to cover himself. This isn't. I mean, it's not what it looks like. But it was exactly what it looked like. Heather didn't even have the decency to appear ashamed. After the initial surprise, she just sat there, sheets pulled up, watching me crumble. "We didn't mean for it to happen," she finally said, as if that somehow made it better. "It just did." I threw the engagement ring at Ethan and ran. He followed me to the parking lot, pulling on clothes as he ran, calling my name. When he caught up to me, his excuses were pathetic. "We've been under so much stress with the wedding," he said. "Heather was just helping with the planning, and things evolved. I'm confused about everything right now." "How long?" I demanded. His hesitation told me everything. "A few months," he finally admitted. "A few months." While I'd been choosing flowers and writing vows, they'd been sneaking around behind my back. The betrayal was complete when Ethan said the words that confirmed my sister's victory once again. "I think I need some time to figure things out," he said. "I care about both of you." I laughed in his face. "There's nothing to figure out. You two deserve each other." The aftermath was as ugly as you might expect. Our family was torn apart. My mother tried desperately to mediate, suggesting family therapy and making excuses for Heather's behavior. "She's always looked up to you," she said, as if admiration justified sleeping with my fiancé. My father was different. He could barely look at Heather, his disappointment palpable in the heavy silences that filled our family home. As for me, I fell into a depression that felt bottomless. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't imagine ever trusting anyone again. The wedding was canceled, deposits lost, explanations painfully given to friends and extended family. The humiliation was almost as bad as the heartbreak. The final blow came 3 months later when I learned that Ethan and Heather were officially dating. My mother delivered this news gently, watching my face for signs of another breakdown. Instead, something hardened inside me. That same day, I applied for jobs in Boston. As far from our small Connecticut town as I could reasonably go while still being able to drive back, if absolutely necessary. 2 weeks later, I left without saying goodbye to Heather. Moving to Boston was terrifying. I'd visited the city exactly twice before, had no friends there, and arrived with savings that would cover about 3 months of expenses if I was extremely careful. I found a tiny studio apartment in Allston, more of a converted closet, really, and took the first job I could get, working as an administrative assistant at a small marketing firm despite having a business degree. Those first few months were incredibly lonely. I'd come home to my empty apartment, eat microwave dinners, and cry myself to sleep. On weekends, I'd walk around the city alone, trying to convince myself that this independent life was what I wanted. The truth was, I felt like a failure. Everyone back home probably pitied me. Poor Morgan couldn't keep her man, ran away to lick her wounds. The turning point came at a local coffee shop where I'd become a regular. One Saturday morning, all the tables were full except for one where a woman about my age was sitting alone. When I asked if I could share her table, she looked up from her laptop and smiled. "Only if you tell me whether I should go with the blue or green background for this presentation," she said, turning her screen to show me 2 marketing layouts. That woman was Brooke, and she became my first real friend in Boston. She worked in digital marketing and, after hearing about my situation, helped me find a better apartment in her building and introduced me to her network. When she discovered I had a business degree but was working as an assistant, she was outraged on my behalf. "You're way too qualified for that job," she insisted. "My company is looking for a junior account manager. You should apply." I did, and though I didn't get that specific position, the interview led to a different opportunity at a mid-sized agency. The pay was still modest, but it was a legitimate marketing role with growth potential. I threw myself into the work, staying late, volunteering for challenging projects, and reading industry publications in my spare time. Work became my therapy and my salvation. Within 2 years, I'd been promoted twice. My innovative campaign for a local brewery caught the attention of larger clients, and I began developing a specialty in digital strategy for food and beverage brands. The more I succeeded professionally, the less I dwelled on what had happened with Ethan and Heather. I still had moments of anger and hurt, but they grew less frequent and less intense. For years into my Boston life, I attended an industry conference where I met Lucas, a creative director with complementary skills to mine. We hit it off professionally and spent the entire conference exchanging ideas about where digital marketing was headed. By the end of the weekend, we were seriously discussing starting our own agency. We could do everything these big agencies are doing, but faster and more personalized, Lucas argued over our third cup of coffee. You've got the strategic mind, I've got the creative vision. We'd be unstoppable. The idea was both exciting and terrifying. Starting a business meant risk, potential failure, and dipping into the savings I'd carefully built. But it also meant freedom and the chance to create something that was truly mine, something no one could take away from me. 6 months later, Morgan and Lucas Digital Marketing launched from a tiny shared workspace in Cambridge. Our first clients were friends of friends, small businesses with minimal budgets. We worked 18-hour days, handling everything from strategy to execution to billing. There were moments when I questioned our sanity, when the bank account dwindled and prospects didn't return calls. But slowly, steadily, our reputation grew. A campaign we created for a local craft brewery went viral, bringing attention from larger regional brands. By our second year, we had hired 2 employees and moved to a real office. By year 3, we had a team of 8 and a portfolio of impressive clients. The breakthrough came when TechFuture, a rapidly growing software company, hired us for a complete marketing overhaul. The success of that campaign put us on the map nationally. Suddenly, we were fielding calls from companies we'd previously only dreamed of working with. We expanded to a team of 20, then 30. Lucas handled the creative side while I managed client relationships and business development. By the time I turned 36, 8 years after leaving my hometown, I was co-owner of a thriving agency with offices in Boston and New York, financial security beyond what I'd ever imagined, and a confidence that came from building something substantial from nothing. The girl who had fled Connecticut heartbroken and humiliated had been replaced by a woman who knew her worth. I occasionally heard news from home through infrequent calls with my parents. Heather and Ethan had married 6 months after I left and quickly had 2 children. My mother always delivered these updates carefully, watching for signs that the information might wound me. The truth was, after a few years, it didn't. Their life seemed distant and irrelevant to the person I had become. I met Gabriel Hunter at the annual Tech Innovation Summit in San Francisco. Our agency had been hired to promote the event, and I was there overseeing operations and networking with potential clients. Gabriel was one of the keynote speakers, a brilliant entrepreneur who had built a revolutionary data security company from his garage and sold it for millions before starting 2 more successful ventures. I knew of him by reputation, of course. Anyone in the tech industry did. But I hadn't expected him to be so approachable. After his keynote, instead of disappearing with the other speakers, he mingled with attendees, asking thoughtful questions and listening intently to the answers. When we were introduced by a mutual connection, I was prepared for a quick handshake and pleasantry before he moved on. Instead, he engaged me in a 15-minute conversation about digital marketing trends and the challenges of building authentic brand voices in tech. "Your perspective is refreshing," he said as we exchanged business cards. "Most marketers just want to talk about metrics and conversions. You're thinking about the human element." 2 weeks later, his office called mine. Gabriel wanted to hire our agency for a major campaign launching his newest venture, a platform that helps small businesses protect their digital assets. The project was substantial enough that I became his primary contact, meeting weekly to discuss strategy and progress. Our professional relationship was productive from the start. Gabriel had clear vision but trusted our expertise. He challenged ideas without being dismissive and recognized good work with genuine appreciation. After our meetings, we'd often continue discussions over coffee, talking about industry trends and sharing perspectives on business leadership. Gradually, these conversations extended beyond work. I learned that Gabriel had grown up in Oregon with educator parents who emphasized curiosity over achievement. He taught himself coding as a teenager and put himself through college with scholarships and part-time jobs. Despite his success, he lived relatively modestly and invested heavily in educational initiatives for underprivileged youth. The transition from professional acquaintances to friends happened so naturally that I barely noticed it. We started exchanging articles and book recommendations. Our coffee meetings occasionally became dinner if work ran late. We discovered shared interests in hiking, independent films, and terrible sci-fi movies that we both loved ironically. What I didn't realize until Brooke pointed it out over brunch one Sunday was that I talked about Gabriel constantly. "You light up when you mention him," she observed. "When are you going to admit that this is more than a professional friendship?" Her comment startled me. I hadn't thought of Gabriel or anyone romantically in years. After Ethan, I'd gone on occasional dates, but always found reasons why things wouldn't work out. I had convinced myself that I was fulfilled by my career and friendships. The idea of being vulnerable again, of trusting someone with my heart, was terrifying. "He's a client," I told Brooke firmly. "And even if he wasn't, I'm not looking for a relationship." But her words stayed with me, making me uncomfortably aware of how my pulse quickened slightly when Gabriel's name appeared on my phone, or how I found myself putting extra effort into my appearance before our meetings. Gabriel never pushed for anything beyond friendship. I later learned that he had his own relationship baggage, a marriage in his 20s that ended when his then-wife decided she'd rather be married to his business partner. We were both cautious, circling around the growing attraction between us without acknowledging it. The turning point came after we'd known each other for about 8 months. We were celebrating the successful launch of his new platform with dinner at a small Italian restaurant. The campaign had exceeded all expectations, and the wine and conversation flowed easily as we basked in the achievement. "I have a confession," Gabriel said as we finished our meal. "I've been dragging out this campaign with additional meetings that probably could have been emails." My heart stuttered. "Why would you do that?" His eyes met mine steadily. "Because I wanted to see you. And I wasn't sure if you'd still want to meet if it wasn't about work." The honesty of his answer disarmed me completely. This successful, brilliant man was admitting uncertainty, making himself vulnerable in a way that resonated deeply. I said quietly. "I'd like that very much." Our first official date was the following weekend, a day trip to a coastal town north of Boston. Without the structure of a business meeting, I was nervous, but the ease between us remained. Gabriel was attentive without being overbearing, interesting without dominating the conversation. By the time he walked me to my door that evening, something had shifted permanently. "I'd like to kiss you," he said. "But I also want you to know that I'm not in any rush. We can take this as slowly as you need." His consideration nearly undid me. I stood on tiptoe and pressed my lips to his, a kiss that started gently but deepened as years of self-protection began to melt away. Our relationship progressed with the same thoughtful intentionality that characterized Gabriel himself. He never pushed for more than I was ready to give, and gradually I found myself sharing parts of my past I'd kept hidden from everyone else, including the full story of Heather and Ethan's betrayal. "I'm sorry that happened to you," he said when I finally told him, holding my hand across his kitchen table. "But I'm not sorry about where it led you. If you hadn't moved to Boston, built your agency, we might never have met." The perspective was illuminating. For years, I'd seen Heather's betrayal as something that had derailed my life. Gabriel helped me see that it had actually set me on a different, and ultimately better, path. As months became a year, then 2, the relationship deepened into something I hadn't known was possible. With Ethan, there had been passion and compatibility, but also a sense that I was lucky to have caught the attention of someone from his world. With Gabriel, there was mutual respect and admiration. We were equals, partners in the truest sense. His proposal came on an ordinary Tuesday evening as we cooked dinner together in his apartment. There was no grand gesture, just a quiet moment when he set down the spatula, took both my hands, and told me he couldn't imagine his life without me. "I don't need an answer right now," he said. "Take whatever time you need." But I didn't need time. I'd known for months that this was right, that he was right. We were married 6 months later in an intimate ceremony with only close friends present. Neither of us wanted a big production. We both valued the commitment more than the celebration. We decided against having children, focusing instead on our relationship and careers. Gabriel's latest company was growing exponentially, and our agency continued to thrive. We bought a beautiful brownstone in Boston's South End and built a life filled with work we loved, friends who supported us, and the kind of partnership I'd once thought existed only in fiction. For nearly 3 years, that life felt perfect. I had everything I'd ever wanted and had genuinely stopped thinking about the past. I rarely spoke to my family aside from occasional calls with my parents, and that felt like enough. I'd made peace with the distance, both geographical and emotional. Then the call came that would change everything. It was my father who called with the news. His voice sounded older than I remembered, weighted with something I couldn't immediately identify. "Your mother has pancreatic cancer," he said without preamble. "Stage 4. The doctors are saying maybe 3 months." The world seemed to tilt sideways. My mother and I had a complicated relationship, but she was still my mother. The thought of her dying, of never having the chance to resolve our issues, hit me with unexpected force. "I'm coming home," I said automatically. "I'll make arrangements today." After hanging up, I sat motionless at my desk, trying to process the information. My mother was dying. I would need to return to Connecticut. I would see Heather and Ethan for the first time in a decade. That evening, I told Gabriel everything, not just about my mother's diagnosis, but about my fear of going back, of facing the past I'd so carefully walled off. "I don't know if I can handle seeing them," I admitted. "Especially now, when I should be focusing on my mother." Gabriel listened thoughtfully, his hand steady on mine. "You don't have to decide everything now," he said. "Let's just go and be with your parents. We'll navigate the rest as it comes." His use of "we" wasn't lost on me. Gabriel had never met my parents or seen my hometown. He had built relationships with many of my Boston friends, but had no connection to my life before. Yet here he was, unhesitatingly including himself in this difficult journey. "You'd come with me?" I asked. He looked surprised at the question. "Of course. You wouldn't go through this alone." We flew to Connecticut the following weekend. I'd booked rooms at a hotel rather than staying at my parents' house, a small buffer I needed for my emotional well-being. As we drove from the airport in our rental car, I gave Gabriel a tour of my past, my high school, the park where I'd spent summers, the downtown that looked smaller than I remembered. The hospital visit was difficult. My mother looked diminished in the bed, her always perfect hair now thin, her complexion gray. My father sat beside her, holding her hand with a tenderness that made my throat tight. They both brightened when they saw me, and there was a tearful reunion before I introduced Gabriel. "We've heard so much about you," my mother said, though we both knew that wasn't entirely true. Our infrequent calls had included only the barest details about my life. Gabriel was perfect, warm, engaging, helping to smooth over awkward moments with questions about their lives and gentle humor. I watched my parents respond to him, saw the approval in their eyes, and felt a complicated mix of emotions. Pride in the man I had married, relief at their acceptance, and a lingering hurt that they had tried to maintain relationships with both their daughters even after what Heather had done. We were just about to leave when the door opened, and Heather walked in with her 2 children, a girl around 9 and a boy who looked about 7. She stopped short when she saw me, an expression of genuine shock crossing her face before she composed herself. "Morgan," she said. "Dad told me you were coming, but I didn't realize it would be today." 10 years had changed her. She was still beautiful, but in a more polished, deliberate way. Designer clothes, Perfect makeup, the kind of blowout that comes from expensive salons. Her children were similarly well-dressed, standing quietly beside her with curious eyes. "Heather," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "These must be your children." "Emma and Liam," she confirmed. Then, with visible effort, "And this is my husband, Gabriel," I said, watching her eyes widen slightly. "Gabriel, this is my sister Heather." The introduction was painfully civil. Gabriel, unaware of the full history, was genuinely friendly. Heather was clearly thrown by his presence, but recovered quickly, asking appropriate questions about how long we'd been married and where we lived. The children were introduced to their Aunt Morgan with rehearsed politeness. Thankfully, the encounter was brief. We made our exit, promising to return the next day, leaving Heather and her children for their visit. In the hospital corridor, Gabriel squeezed my hand. "You did great," he said. "She was surprised I wasn't alone," I noted. "Maybe she thought you would be," he replied carefully. "People sometimes project their own expectations." The following weeks fell into a pattern. We extended our hotel stay indefinitely as my mother's condition deteriorated. I spent days at the hospital, sometimes with Gabriel, sometimes alone when he needed to handle work remotely. I arranged my schedule to avoid overlapping with Heather when possible, but some encounters were inevitable. During one such overlap, I learned that Ethan wouldn't be joining her until the weekend. "He's very busy at work," she explained, a brittle edge to her voice that made me wonder. My father and I had several long conversations during this time. One evening, as we sat in the hospital cafeteria while my mother slept, he apologized. "We should have taken a stronger stand when everything happened with Ethan," he said. "Your mother wanted to keep the family together at any cost, and I went along with it. I've always regretted that." "You were in an impossible position," I said, surprised by how much I meant it. "Still," he insisted, "you needed to know we were on your side." "I'm sorry we didn't make that clearer." These conversations with my father, combined with the precious final talks with my mother, began a healing process I hadn't known I needed. My mother, in her lucid moments, expressed regret for her attempts to normalize what had happened. "I thought I could fix everything," she admitted weakly. "I was wrong." During her final week, she made a request that troubled me deeply. "I want you to try with Heather," she said. "Not for her sake, but for yours. Holding on to anger takes so much energy, Morgan." I couldn't promise her what she wanted, but I nodded, unwilling to cause her additional pain. She passed peacefully 2 days later, with my father and me at her bedside. Heather arrived 20 minutes too late, her mascara running as she stood in the doorway looking at our mother's still form. The funeral arrangements became a series of small battles. Heather wanted an elaborate service with hundreds of guests. I argued for something more intimate, in line with what I knew our mother would have preferred. My father, grief-stricken, retreated from these decisions, leaving us to negotiate with minimal bloodshed. In the end, we compromised. The service would be medium-sized, but focused on close family and friends. I took charge of the program and music, while Heather handled the reception and flowers. We communicated primarily through terse texts and brief phone calls, maintaining the facade of cooperation while minimizing actual contact. The night before the funeral, lying beside Gabriel in our hotel room, I confessed my anxiety about the coming day. "I've been pretending to be stronger than I am," I said. "Seeing Ethan tomorrow, having to stand beside Heather as we bury our mother. I'm not sure I can do it without falling apart or causing a scene." Gabriel pulled me closer. "You are strong," he said. "Look at everything you've built, everything you've overcome. But strength doesn't mean you can't lean on someone else. That's why I'm here." His confidence in me was steadying. I fell asleep that night thinking of my mother's last request and wondering if there was any possibility of finding peace with the past. The morning of the funeral dawned clear and cool, the kind of perfect fall day my mother would have loved. Gabriel and I dressed in our hotel room, me in a simple black dress, him in a dark suit that emphasized his tall, athletic frame. As he adjusted his tie in the mirror, I was struck by a wave of gratitude for his presence. "I couldn't do this without you," I told him. He turned and kissed me gently. "You could, but you don't have to." We arrived at the church early to finalize details with the minister. Heather and Ethan hadn't yet arrived, and I was grateful for the reprieve. My father joined us, looking lost in his dark suit, his face gray with grief. I hadn't seen him interact much with Gabriel yet, but they fell into easy conversation, my father visibly relaxing as Gabriel discussed everything from baseball to the renovation of the church's historic stained glass. As guests began to arrive, Gabriel excused himself to take an urgent call from his company. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "There's a situation with the European servers. I'll be quick." He stepped outside just as Heather arrived with her children. "Ethan wasn't with her, handling the parking," she explained. She looked impeccable in a designer black dress that probably cost more than my first month's rent in Boston, her hair and makeup flawless despite the occasion. The children were similarly well-dressed and subdued. "Everything looks nice," she said, surveying the flowers and program. Mom would have approved. It was the closest thing to a genuine compliment she'd offered since I'd returned, and I nodded in acknowledgement. "Your flowers are beautiful." She always loved lilies. An awkward silence fell between us. Emma tugged at her mother's hand, asking to go find her grandfather, and Heather sent both children off with instructions to behave. Alone now, Heather's demeanor shifted subtly. "So," she said, "I haven't had a chance to really talk to you. How have you been?" The casualness of the question, after 10 years of silence, was almost laughable. "I've been well," I replied simply. "Built a life I love in Boston." "Dad mentioned you have some kind of marketing company?" she probed. "An agency, yes. Digital marketing, primarily for tech and consumer brands. We have offices in Boston and New York now." I saw a flicker of surprise cross her face. "That's impressive. I always knew you were smart." Her tone suggested she hadn't expected this level of success, and I felt a small, petty satisfaction at having exceeded her expectations. "And you?" I asked, more out of politeness than genuine interest. "Still in Hartford?" "Yes, we have a beautiful home in West Hartford. Ethan is a senior partner at his father's firm now. The children are at Oakwood Academy. It's very exclusive, but Ethan's family has connections." Her emphasis on the material trappings of her life was telling. Before I could respond, she continued with a question that felt deliberately pointed. "No children for you? I would have thought at 38 you'd be worried about your biological clock." The comment stung as intended, but years of business negotiations had taught me to control my reactions. Gabriel and I decided against children. We're both fulfilled with our careers and our relationship. Heather opened her mouth to respond, but stopped as Ethan approached. 10 years had changed him too. His once lean frame had thickened around the middle, his hairline slightly receded. He still had the confidence of privilege, but there was something weary in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "Morgan," he said, extending his hand formally. "It's been a long time. I'm sorry about your mother." "Our mother," I corrected, shaking his hand briefly. "Thank you for coming." The awkwardness was palpable until Heather broke it by calling the children back over and arranging them in front of her like a protective barrier. "Emma, Liam, say hello properly to your Aunt Morgan." The children dutifully greeted me, and Heather placed her hand possessively on Ethan's arm. "We should probably take our seats," she said. "Family at the front, of course." As we moved toward the front pew, Heather glanced around. "Is your husband joining us?" "Gabriel, was it?" "Yes, he just had to take an important call. He'll be right in." Heather's lips curved in what might have been sympathy, but felt more like satisfaction. "Work calls on the day you bury your mother-in-law? That's dedicated." "His company is dealing with a situation in Europe," I explained, though I didn't owe her any justification. "Well, Ethan made sure his entire schedule was clear for this week, she replied. Family first, always. Before I could respond, she continued in a lower voice, it must be hard attending family events alone. I remember how that feels from when Ethan and I first got together and some people weren't welcoming. The audacity of comparing her experience as the woman who had stolen her sister's fiancé to my situation momentarily left me speechless. Mistaking my silence for vulnerability, she pressed on. Poor you, still single at 38. Look at my husband, handsome, rich, and happy. We have everything, the perfect family, beautiful home, summer house on the lake. Something in me snapped. Not with anger, but with a strange, calm clarity. I looked at her perfectly arranged life, at Ethan's forced smile and the slight tension in his shoulders, at the way her hand clutched his arm a little too tightly. Meet my husband too, I said quietly. She blinked, confused. What? I turned and waved to Gabriel, who was just re-entering the church. He saw me and smiled, making his way toward us with that confident, unhurried stride that always turned heads. Heather followed my gaze, her expression shifting from confusion to shock as Gabriel approached. At 6'2" with salt and pepper hair, striking blue eyes, and the physique of someone who hiked and rock climbed regularly, Gabriel was impossible to miss. But it wasn't just his appearance, it was the aura of quiet confidence and genuine warmth that drew people to him. Sorry about that, he said as he joined us, his hand finding the small of my back. Crisis averted. Gabriel, this is Ethan, I said calmly. Heather's husband. Recognition flashed in Ethan's eyes immediately. Gabriel Hunter? The Gabriel Hunter? From SecureCore and Vision Tech. Gabriel nodded, extending his hand. That's me. You're in investment banking, right? Morgan mentioned it. Heather was staring at Gabriel, her face draining of color as she connected the dots. My husband wasn't just successful. He was the kind of successful that made national business magazines. The kind of successful that made Ethan's senior partner status at his father's firm look like a participation trophy. You're married to Morgan? She finally managed. 3 wonderful years now, Gabriel confirmed, smiling at me with genuine affection. Best decision I ever made. Ethan was now enthusiastically engaging Gabriel in conversation about his companies, his expression a mixture of envy and networking opportunity. Heather stood frozen, her perfect image suddenly shattered. The sister she had pitted moments before was married to one of the most successful tech entrepreneurs of the decade. I took no joy in her discomfort, at least, not much, but there was a certain satisfaction in having the narrative she had constructed so thoroughly disrupted. For years, she had likely imagined me alone and unsuccessful, nursing my wounds while she lived her perfect life with Ethan. The reality was so dramatically different that she seemed unable to process it. We should take our seats, I suggested gently. The service is about to begin. As we settled into the front pew, my father, then Gabriel and me, then Heather, Ethan, and their children, I felt Gabriel squeeze my hand supportively. He had no idea about the exchange that had just occurred, but he sensed my tension and responded with silent support. Throughout the service, I was aware of Heather's sidelong glances, her attempts to reconcile the successful, confident woman beside an exceptional man with the heartbroken sister she had betrayed a decade ago. By the time we stood to follow my mother's casket out of the church, something had shifted permanently between us. The power dynamic she had assumed was completely upended, leaving her visibly unmoored. At the cemetery, as we stood beside the open grave, I felt a strange peace replace the anxiety I'd carried all morning. My mother was gone, but I had honored her. And in her absence, I had finally stepped fully into the person I had become, someone who couldn't be diminished by old wounds or defined by past betrayals. The reception following the funeral was held at my parents' house, the home where Heather and I had grown up. Walking through the familiar rooms felt like stepping through time, memories layered over every corner. Gabriel moved easily among the guests, charming my mother's friends and my father's colleagues, giving me space when I needed it while remaining supportively nearby. I was in the kitchen, momentarily alone and catching my breath, when Heather entered. She hesitated in the doorway before deliberately closing the door behind her. "Can we talk?" she asked. "Privately." I nodded, setting down my water glass. "I think that's overdue." For a moment, she stood awkwardly, as if unsure how to begin. The polished confidence she had displayed earlier seemed to have deserted her. "Your husband seems nice," she finally offered. "I didn't know you were married." "You didn't ask," I pointed out. "Not until today." She acknowledged this with a slight nod. "I shouldn't have said what I did. About you being alone. It was cruel." "Why did you say it then?" Her perfect makeup couldn't hide the flush that crept up her neck. "I don't know. Habit, maybe? Or maybe I wanted to believe you were still hurt by what happened with Ethan and me," she admitted. "Because that would mean it mattered. That he mattered." There was something in her voice, a vulnerability that hadn't been there before, that made me really look at her. Beyond the designer clothes and careful appearance, I saw signs of strain, fine lines around her eyes that makeup couldn't quite conceal, a tightness to her mouth. "Heather," I said carefully, "are you happy?" The question seemed to startle her. For a second, I thought she would revert to the glossy assurances about her perfect life. Instead, to my shock, her eyes filled with tears. "No," she whispered. "Not for a long time." She moved further into the kitchen, leaning against the counter as if she needed support. "Ethan's gambling," she confessed. "It started small, sports betting, poker nights. Now it's out of control. He's lost so much money." She trailed off, shaking her head. "Have you tried to get him help?" I asked, unsure how to respond to this unexpected confidence. 3 different therapists. 2 treatment programs. Nothing sticks. His father has bailed him out twice, but now even he's losing patience. She laughed without humor. The perfect life I was just bragging about? We might lose the house. The summer home on the lake is already gone. We sold it last year, but still tell everyone we have it. I was stunned into silence. This was so far from what I had imagined their life to be. "And that's not even the worst part," she continued, her voice dropping lower. "The affairs started about 5 years ago. At first, he was careful, discreet. Now he barely bothers to hide them. His latest is his assistant. How cliché is that?" "She's 24. Why do you stay?" I asked. "The children," she said immediately. "And appearances. Our whole social circle, it's all tied to Ethan's family, his position. If we divorced..." She shook her head. "Besides, what would that say about everything I gave up to be with him? That it was all for nothing." The irony was breathtaking. For years, I had imagined them in perfect happiness while I struggled to rebuild. Now I discovered that while I was finding genuine success and love, they had been living a lie. "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it. Despite everything, seeing her in pain brought me no satisfaction. "You know what the worst part is?" she asked, wiping carefully under her eyes to preserve her makeup. "I did it to myself. I saw you with someone wonderful, and I wanted that. I didn't even really want Ethan specifically, I just wanted what you had. I've been doing that our whole lives, haven't I? Trying to take what's yours because I somehow thought it would make me happier, more complete." The admission was stunning in its self-awareness. I had never expected Heather to recognize, let alone acknowledge, the pattern that had defined our relationship. "I was so jealous of you," she continued. "You were always the smart one, the capable one. Mom and Dad were so proud of your grades, your focus. I was just there, pretty enough, charming enough, but never exceptional. When you got engaged to Ethan, with his family's money and status, it felt like you were winning again. So I took him." She looked down at her hands. "I'm not proud of it." "That doesn't excuse what you did," I said quietly. "No, it doesn't," she agreed. "Nothing could. I've regretted it for years, even before things started going bad with Ethan. I've wanted to apologize so many times, but I didn't know how. And then more time passed, and it seemed impossible. We stood in silence for a moment, the sounds of the reception muffled by the closed door. "What will you do now?" I finally asked. She shrugged. "Keep pretending, I guess. At least until the kids are older." Then she looked at me directly. "I am genuinely happy for you, Morgan. Your husband seems like a good man. A real one, not just the appearance of one." Before I could respond, there was a knock at the door, and my father entered. He looked between us, concern evident on his face. "Everything all right in here?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "We were just talking." Later that evening, after most guests had departed, my father and I sat on the back porch, wrapped in sweaters against the autumn chill. Gabriel was inside, helping with cleanup despite my protests that he didn't need to. "Your mother would have liked him very much," my father said, nodding toward the house. "I think so too," I agreed. "She tried, he continued, "to fix things between you and Heather. Maybe not in the right ways, but she tried. It broke her heart to see her daughters estranged." "I know she did," I said. "I just couldn't give her what she wanted." "Not then." He nodded, understanding. "And now?" "I don't know," I admitted. "Heather and I talked earlier. Really talked, maybe for the first time in our adult lives. I don't think we'll ever be close, but maybe we don't have to be enemies." "Your mother would have considered that a victory," he said with a sad smile. "She always believed family could overcome anything." "Some things are harder to overcome than others," I noted. "Yes," he agreed. "I should have stood up more firmly when everything happened with Ethan. Supported you more clearly. I was trying so hard to keep peace that I failed to demand justice. I hope you can forgive me for that." His apology touched me deeply. "There's nothing to forgive, Dad. You were caught in an impossible situation." We sat in companionable silence until Gabriel joined us, bringing fresh coffee. As the three of us talked easily under the stars, I felt a sense of closure beginning to form. Not the perfect reconciliation my mother might have wished for, but a kind of peace nonetheless. The next morning, as we prepared to check out of our hotel and return to Boston, I received a text from Ethan asking to meet briefly before we left town. After consulting with Gabriel, who offered to come with me but respected my decision to go alone, I agreed to meet Ethan at a coffee shop near our hotel. He was waiting when I arrived, looking tired and older than he had at the funeral. The confident investment banker was nowhere to be seen. In his place was a man who seemed weighed down by his choices. "Thank you for meeting me," he began. "I wanted to talk to you without Heather present." "What about?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. He stared into his coffee cup. "I owe you an apology. A real one. Not the perfunctory thing I said at the funeral. What Heather and I did to you is unforgivable." "Yes, it was," I agreed. He looked up, perhaps surprised by my directness. "I've thought about it a lot over the years. About how differently things might have turned out." There was something in his tone that made me uncomfortable, a hint of what might have been, as if he were imagining an alternative life where he had chosen me instead of Heather. "I'm not interested in hypotheticals, Ethan," I said firmly. "What happened, happened. We've all moved on." "Have we?" he asked. "You seem to have done well for yourself. Better than I would have expected." The backhanded compliment irritated me. "What does that mean?" He backpedaled quickly. "Just that, you've clearly thrived. Great career, successful husband. You've done really well." "Yes, I have," I agreed. "Though not in the way I planned when we were together." He nodded, seeming unsure how to continue. Finally, he said, "Your husband, he's quite impressive. Gabriel Hunter is a legend in investment circles." "He's much more than his success," I said pointedly. Ethan had the grace to look embarrassed. "Of course. I just meant, well, you clearly traded up." The crassness of the statement was so typical of the man he had become. I stood, gathering my purse. "I didn't trade anything, Ethan. I rebuilt my life after you destroyed the future we had planned. I found happiness not because of what you did, but despite it. And unlike you, I learned from my experiences. I turned to leave, but paused. Whatever issues you and Heather are having, I hope you work them out for your children's sake, if nothing else. But don't contact me again with vague notions about what might have been. That door closed 10 years ago, and I'm profoundly grateful that it did. Walking away from that coffee shop, I felt a weight lift that I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. The what-ifs and might-have-beens that had occasionally haunted me over the years were finally put to rest. Meeting Ethan now, seeing what he had become, I understood with complete clarity that losing him had been no loss at all. When I returned to the hotel, Gabriel was waiting with our packed bags and a supportive smile. "How was it?" he asked. "Illuminating," I replied. "And final." We checked out and began the drive back to Boston. As Connecticut receded in the rearview mirror, I felt not the relief of escape I had experienced 10 years earlier, but the satisfaction of having faced my past and found it powerless over my present. Returning to our life in Boston after the funeral felt like emerging from a time warp. Our brownstone, our routines, our friends, everything was exactly as we'd left it, yet I felt fundamentally changed by the experience. The past I'd kept carefully compartmentalized had been opened, examined, and in many ways, finally put to rest. Gabriel gave me space to process everything while remaining steadfastly supportive. One evening, about a week after our return, we sat on our rooftop deck with glasses of wine, the Boston skyline glittering before us. "You've been quieter since we got back," he observed gently. Not in a bad way, just reflective. "I've been thinking about how differently everything turned out than I expected," I admitted. 10 years ago, when Heather and Ethan betrayed me, I thought my life was over. I couldn't imagine any path forward that wasn't defined by that loss. Gabriel nodded, encouraging me to continue. But if that hadn't happened, if Heather hadn't stolen Ethan, if we had gotten married as planned, I would never have moved to Boston. Would never have started the agency. Would never have met you. I reached for his hand. I would have had a completely different life, and I can't imagine it would have been better than this one. The funny thing about paths not taken, Gabriel said thoughtfully, is that we only see the idealized version. If you had married Ethan, who knows what challenges you would have faced. Based on what you've told me about him now, it sounds like you dodged a bullet. A bullet I was devastated not to take at the time, I said with a wry smile. Life is strange that way. In the weeks that followed, I found myself thinking often about my mother's last request, that I try with Heather. While I couldn't imagine ever having the close, sisterly relationship my mother had wanted for us, I realized I no longer harbored the active resentment that had consumed me for so long. When my father called to check in about a month after the funeral, I asked about Heather. His silence spoke volumes. "That bad?" I prompted. "She and Ethan are separating," he finally said. "She's staying with the children in the house for now, but she's looking for work. It's been a difficult adjustment for her." The news didn't surprise me after what Heather had confided at the funeral, but I did feel a twinge of sympathy. "Is she okay?" "Financially, I mean." "Managing," my father said. "Ethan's providing support, but his situation is complicated. Apparently, there are significant debts." After we hung up, I sat for a long time thinking about Heather, not the sister who had betrayed me, but the woman who was now facing an uncertain future with 2 children to support. The thought that kept returning was simple, there but for fortune. That evening, I discussed it with Gabriel. "I'm thinking of reaching out to Heather," I said. "Not to reconcile completely, but to, I don't know, offer some support, maybe?" Gabriel, as always, understood. Sometimes the most healing thing isn't forgiveness or reconciliation, but simply refusing to perpetuate pain, he said. "Whatever you decide, I'm with you." I sent Heather a text the next day, just a simple message asking how she was doing. Her response came hours later, cautious but appreciative. We began a tentative, sporadic correspondence. Nothing deep, nothing that addressed the past directly, but a careful rebuilding of some basic communication. 2 months later, when she mentioned she was struggling to find work with her limited resume, I surprised myself by offering to connect her with some contacts in Connecticut who might have marketing positions. It wasn't an offer to work together or even a promise of a job, just a small extension of help that acknowledged her humanity separate from our history. "Why are you doing this?" she texted after I'd made the introductions. "You don't owe me anything." Quite the opposite. "I'm not doing it because I owe you," I replied. "I'm doing it because I don't want to be defined by what happened between us anymore." Moving forward doesn't mean forgetting, but it does mean choosing not to let the past dictate the future. Over the following year, our relationship evolved into something I would never have expected. Not close friendship, but a careful mutual respect. My father was overjoyed, even if it wasn't the complete reconciliation my mother had hoped for. When Heather's divorce was finalized, I found myself genuinely hoping she would find a better path forward. In an unexpected development, I also began building relationships with my niece and nephew. Emma and Liam were initially shy during our first video calls, but gradually warmed up to their Aunt Morgan in Boston. When Gabriel and I invited them, along with Heather and my father, to spend a long weekend with us, the children were thrilled by the adventure of visiting a new city. That weekend marked a turning point. Watching Gabriel teach Liam how to skip stones across the Charles River, seeing Emma's delight as she explored our office and declared she wanted to be a business lady like me someday, these moments created a new context for our fractured family. On their last evening in Boston, after the children had gone to bed in our guest room, Heather, my father, Gabriel, and I sat in the living room. The conversation flowed more easily than I would have thought possible a year earlier. "Mom would have loved this," my father said, looking around at the three of us, seeing everyone together again. "She was right about holding on to anger," I admitted. "It does take too much energy." Heather looked at me, her expression open and vulnerable in a way I'd rarely seen. "I never properly apologized to you, Morgan." "Not really. I am genuinely sorry for what I did. Not just because of how things turned out with Ethan, but because it was wrong, period. You deserved better from your sister." The apology, so long in coming, meant more than I had expected. "Thank you for saying that," I said simply. As our lives continued to unfold, Heather built a career in marketing with the help of my initial introductions, eventually finding her footing as a single mother and professional. My father became a regular visitor to Boston, developing a close relationship with Gabriel based on their shared love of history and baseball. Our agency continued to thrive, as did Gabriel's latest tech venture. At Thanksgiving the following year, we hosted everyone at our home: my father, Heather, Emma, Liam, and even Brooke and her family. As I looked around the table at this patchwork family we had created, I realized that the perfect revenge against those who hurt us isn't pain or retribution. It's living well, finding joy, and refusing to allow past wounds to determine future possibilities. The path that led me here was neither straight nor easy. It involved heartbreak, betrayal, and years of rebuilding. But standing on the other side, I wouldn't change a moment of it. Every step, even the painful ones, brought me exactly where I needed to be. I often think about that day at my mother's funeral when Heather mocked my supposedly single status, only to discover how completely wrong her assumptions had been. The shock on her face when she saw Gabriel was certainly satisfying in the moment. But the real victory wasn't showing off my successful husband or proving that I had won after all. It was realizing that none of that mattered anymore, that I had built a life so fulfilling that the old hurts had lost their power over me. If you're watching this and dealing with betrayal or heartbreak of your own, please know that the path forward exists, even when you can't see it yet. The life you rebuild might look nothing like the one you planned, but that doesn't mean it can't be beautiful, meaningful, and even better than what you imagined. Have you ever experienced a betrayal that ultimately led you to something better, or found yourself forgiving someone you never thought you could? Share your story in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that healing is possible, even after the deepest wounds. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, sometimes the most unexpected detours lead to the most beautiful destinations.